Firstly, let me announce that the term of office of the chairman of the unit trust came to an end at the end of July 2017, and today Cabinet agreed to appoint retired Justice Rolston Nelson to be the new chairman of the Unit Trust Corporation. And I'll take this opportunity as well to thank the outgoing chairman for his service. It is my understanding that Mr. Nelson, Justice Nelson, was previously on the board. In fact, he may even have been a former chairman of the Unit Trust Corporation. So he's very well qualified for this position, having retired from the Caribbean Court of Justice, also having a distinguished career in the Trinidad and Tobago Court of Appeal. Having dealt with that, let me now deal with some issues surrounding CL Financial and some statements that have been made in the media by, I would have to say, spokespersons, or in local parlance, mouthpieces for the shareholders of CL Financial. Because the people who are talking, as far as I know, unless I'm subject to correction, they have no shares in CL Financial. So one of the things I saw today, an article written in the Express by a former Minister of Finance, who based most of the article on an allegation that the state, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, this government, is claiming $3.5 billion in fees for the CLICO CLF bailout. Now, I first heard this astonishing figure when Mr. Lawrence Dupré, shortly after the media review that I presented in the Parliament, Mr. Dupré, in or around May 2017 this year, said that the government had spent $3.2 billion in fees, and that was one of the reasons why the shareholders were of the view they had to take back the company, because this astonishing amount of money had been spent on legal fees and so on. The article in the Express today, the kindest words I can use to describe it is that it is a reckless untruth. I have caused a tally to be made of all the fees paid for accountants, lawyers, forensic people, both in Trinidad and Tobago and in the United Kingdom and elsewhere in the United States, a complete tally of the fees paid to all of these professionals since the CLICO bailout began in early 2009. And the tally I have as of today, is somewhere in the vicinity of $250 million, which is less than 10% of the figure quoted in the Express today, the figure alleged and claimed and stated as a fact by a former Minister of Finance, who should really be ministry, so I'm being corrected here, a former minister in the Ministry of Finance, who should know better and should not make these reckless statements which are not based on fact. And I can only assume that these statements are being made because these individuals are spokespersons, or as somebody would say, mouthpieces for others. So they just repeat whatever they are told. Of that $250 million, more than 80% was spent in the 2010 to 2015 period. In fact, the figure is over 90%. But let's use 80 as a good figure. Over 80% of that would have been spent in the 2010 to 2015 period. As I said, the tally is somewhere in the vicinity of $250 million, of which $200 million plus would have been spent between May 2010 and September 2015. I don't think I need to read and spell for you with respect to that. if these individuals who are spokespersons for the shareholders had bothered to read the affidavit of Permanent Secretary Dan Paul, which was filed in the court in support of the government's application to appoint provisional liquidators for CL Financial. In that affidavit, which was lodged somewhere in mid-July and published in the Express with a complete breakdown of the amounts claimed by the government that make up the $23 billion. If these mouthpieces had bothered to read that, or even read the Express, they don't even have to read the affidavit itself. They could read the newspaper, which faithfully on this occasion reproduced what was in the affidavit. They would have seen that instead of $3.5 billion in fees, there is in fact a figure of $2.67 billion in interest and financing costs. And what I said in the mid-year review, which is a publicly available document, it's on the Ministry of Finance website. You can go there now and download what my statement to Parliament was in the mid-year review. What I said was that there was a direct injection of approximately $20.3 billion actual money put in to the CL bailout, plus an additional $3.2 billion made up of funding costs, financing costs, fees, and other costs. Somehow the phrase financing costs, fees, and other costs was compressed into fees. I'm just shocked. It's there in black and white. So this figure of 3.2 billion is a fiction. It's a fabrication. It's a figment of the imagination of these shareholders and their mouthpieces. The actual figure, as I said, is closer to 250 million, of which over $200 million was spent by another administration. The other matter I want to deal with is the extension of the shareholders' agreement. I've gone into the records, and what I've determined is that shortly after we came into government in September 2015, the 16th extension at that point in time, it was the 16th extension, was about to expire, or the 16th extension was due. And we spoke to the shareholders, they came to see us, and we agreed eventually on an extension that would take us for approximately 6 months to April 2016. It took a while. There was a lot of discussion. They were at first reluctant. I don't know if the change of government caused a change in the posture of the shareholders. I have no idea, because they had signed 15 agreements before that without any trouble. Government change, and then we come to number 16, and we had a lot of trouble with them. And that 16th extension, which is simply the identical document to the previous 15 extensions, with just a change in the expiry date, eventually towards November, December, they signed the 16th extension, which was due to expire in April 2016. As April 2016 approached, and there was no resolution of this matter, because there was no indication in any concrete way from the shareholders as to how they intended to pay back taxpayers the 23 odd billion that had been put in, or was owed or committed or spent, we started to discuss another extension to the shareholders agreement. We at this time felt we needed at least 1 year from April 2016 to April 2017, but they had other thoughts. And again, we went through a process of meetings and the shareholders procrastinating, giving us a lot of trouble. And then eventually, in or around June 2016, they agreed to a further extension from April to August. When August arrived, I convened a meeting in my office on the 12th of August 2016, with the representatives of the shareholders to discuss an extension, another extension, because no progress had been made in terms of any concrete proposal coming from the shareholders to repay the $20-odd billion of taxpayers' fund put into this bailout. And we found ourselves in discussions with them, as had happened with the 16th and the 17th extension. They gave us trouble. They promised to sign the extension. They didn't sign it. We called them. They promised to sign it. They didn't sign it. And so it went on and on. As time elapsed, as Minister of Finance, I concluded that something had to be done about this, so that I gave the shareholders a deadline of October 31st, 2016, to produce a concrete proposal to repay taxpayers' funds. And if they did not, then the government would have to exercise its options to recover. This is all public money. This is money that could be used for hospitals, could be used for schools, could be used for social welfare, this $23 billion. So the shareholders were given a deadline of the end of October 2016 to come up with some proposal to repay the country, I will have to say, because this is a private company. $23 billion of public money was put to bail out a private company not owned by the government at the time. So therefore something had to happen. On the 26th of October, just a couple of days before the deadline that I had set, I received a letter from the shareholders with what they called a plan for the repayment to the government and ultimately to the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, this sum, which by then they were already beginning to concede in their correspondence, was at least $22 billion when I look at the letter of the 26th of October. Their proposal then in October was give us back the companies, ask the central bank to release CLICO into their hands, and they promise to pay back taxpayers the $23 billion. That's the proposal of October. Let me repeat that. The proposal of October is give us back control of the companies, use your influence with the central bank to get the central bank to release control, even though we have no influence over the central bank. We can't tell the central bank what to do, but that was in the correspondence. Influence or cause the central bank to release Colonial Life and give it back to the shareholders, together with all the other companies, the various companies, CL World Brand, CL Financial, Angostura, etc., it's home construction, whatever. Of course, that proposal was totally unacceptable because there was no security, there was no collateral, so they would have regained control of these companies without any guarantee of any payment whatsoever of this 23-odd billion of taxpayers' funds. So they were told that this proposal is unacceptable, and they were asked again to sign another extension. Now I have to explain what this extension agreement is and what they are. I notice a commentary about it is up to the government to draft the shareholders' agreement. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. All of the previous agreements were identical word for word. It is an extension of the original agreement. So you have extension number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, all the way up to 17, which is where we had reached in August. Word for word identical to all the other agreements, with one change, the date. So that all this extension would have been was that we proceeding along the lines that the government and the company has proceeded along since 2009. This would be now running on 8 years or 7 years, with just an extension of 6 months or 12 months, as the case may be. So there's no drafting to be done. No lawyers have to get involved. Nobody has to peruse anything. It's the identical agreement of the previous 17 extension agreements. So we started to discuss the date for the extension, as we had done in 2015 and as we had done in mid-2016. And they procrastinated, and they delayed, and they promised, and they just kept, it was a moving target every time you communicate with the shareholders through our government directors on CL Financial, because that was the main medium of communication, in addition to meetings and correspondence directly with me as Minister of Finance. The target keeps moving, and they keep promising to extend the agreement for a suitable period, 6 months, 12 months, as the case may be. When 2017 arrived, and they had not agreed to extend the agreement, they then produced something called Project Rebirth. And I think it's appropriate now for me to read from the second page of Project Rebirth. I think it's very important that members of the media and the national community, by extension, who are watching this press conference, I have with me a copy of Project Rebirth. This is Project Rebirth, submitted by the shareholders to the government in January 2017. And on page 2, it states as follows. Our work is not complete, and as a result, this draft report may not represent our final findings or conclusions. Among other things, the following matters remain outstanding: access to the CLF group auditors, access to the liquidator of Clico Investment Bank, the judicial manager of British American, and their working papers, validation of the components and the financial restructuring plan taken as a whole, meeting with Ernst & Young, examination of correspondence with the Central Bank, the Ministry of Finance, and other representative of government, obtaining letters of representation from target management, completing our internal review procedures as a preamble, and then this astonishing statement. As a result, I'm not making this up, I'm quoting, this draft report should not be relied upon by anyone for any purpose whatsoever. Let me read that again. On page 2, the cover page of Project Rebirth, is this statement: this draft report, Project Rebirth, should not be relied upon by anyone for any purpose whatsoever. Do you think it is reasonable for a submission of that nature to be sent to the government, who is acting in the public interest, trying to recover $23 billion of public funds, to say it can't be relied upon by anyone for any purpose whatsoever? And when you read it, there are two features. It was a regurgitation of what was sent to us in October 2016, gave us back the companies, tell the central bank to release Colonial Life into their hands, and they promised to pay us back the money that is owed to taxpayers. But there was another very strange feature in this report. In the report, they did valuations of the assets of the various companies. And in that valuation of these assets, they valued certain lands at Baku in Tobago at $960 million, and other lands in Tobago adjacent to the lands in Baku at $867 million. This is in this report, this rebirth, that they say you can't rely on it for anything, for any purpose whatsoever. In it, they put that the land owned by Oceanic and Occidental, two subsidiary companies of Clico, is worth $867 million. And the lands owned by Home Construction, called the Baku lands, which is right next door, for any of you who know the area in Tobago, if you go to the west of the Golden Grove Road and you go down towards the sea, you have Baku Estate, is close to the village of Baku, and the Golden Grove Estate, the other one, is closer to the lagoon. And the two are two contiguous estates. One is called the Baku Estate, owned by Home Construction, and the other one is the Golden Grove Estate, previously owned by two subsidiaries of Colonial Life. But there's no valuation, and this is the important thing. In this plan, there's no valuation of those two parcels of land. But I happen to have valuations done by home construction. And in 2014, home construction engaged a very reputable real estate and valuation company called Terra Caribbean, which is one of the premier real estate companies, not just in Trinidad, but in the Caribbean, to do this report on the Baku lands, which are next to the Golden Grove lands. And again, this is not my evaluation. This is a valuation done by home construction. And the value of the Baku estate, which I just mentioned to you, is in this rebirth document that no one must rely upon, at 960 million. Terra Caribbean, and I'm reading from the report of Terra Caribbean, dated August the 18th, 2014, and having examined the parcel, it's 147 acres, immediately adjacent to the Golden Grove estate. Their valuation, after detailed inspection of the property, using different methods, the investment or income capitalization method, the replacement cost method, the residual of project method, they came up with a market value for this 147-acre estate of $75 million. $75 million. And all of these documents will be made available to the media in due course. But in Project Rebirth, they value that land at $960 million. So this idea that the government was somehow trying to, I will have to use the word steal, these lands at a fraction of their value is just so much nonsense. Let me move now to the other parcel next to the Golden Grove, next to the Baku land, which is has been the subject of a lot of discussion by the mouthpieces of CL Financial, because the shareholders are not really talking. They have mouthpieces outside there talking for them. And one particular mouthpiece has been questioning the value of the Golden Grove estate. The government, through the central bank, because according to Section 44D of the Central Bank Act, which is the section that was passed by Parliament in the 2009-2010 period, if the central bank is to transfer any assets to the government in repayment of the debt or any other creditor, valuation, the law requires that a valuation be done on these assets by an independent valuer. That's in Section 44D of the Central Bank Act. The central bank, being very careful, did not do one valuation, it did two. One was done by G.A. Farrell, which is a valuating firm, a valuator, that has been in existence for 41 years. For those of you who may know Woodbrook, take a drive down Woodbrook, and opposite that green food place, you will see G.A. Farrell, 1976, on the fence. 41 years G.A. Farrell has been in business. G.A. Farrell looked very carefully at the Golden Grove estate and produced a report for the central bank. And this report, again, if the media does not already have this, this will be made available to the media. This report went through all of the various properties comprising the Golden Grove estate. It looked at other properties in Tobago. It looked at market valuations. It looked at the best use, the highest and best use of the land, and it valued the Golden Grove estate, assuming that it would be used for an integrated resort development. So the valuation is based on the highest and best use of the Golden Grove lands. And J. Farrell, as I said, which has been in business for 41 years as a professional valuating firm, valued these lands at $150 million in the middle of 2016. But the central bank was being very diligent and decided to do another valuation because the lands were owned by two subsidiary companies of Colonial Life. One was called Occidental and the other one was called Oceanic. So one is called Occidental Investments and the other one called Oceanic Properties. So the central bank, following the procedure in the law and the practice with respect to assets belonging to Colonial Life, selected a valuator, a valuation firm by the name of Duff and Phelps. So Duff and Phelps is an international valuation firm. G.A. Farrell is a local Trinidad and Tobago firm. Duff and Phelps has vast experience and has been valuing properties all over the world for many, many years. And what Duff and Phelps did was to value not only the Golden Grove estate, they valued three properties, 398 acres for the resort site, the same site that Farrell valued, adjacent to the Bonaccord Lagoon. They then valued two remaining single-family homes on Lot 4 and Lot 26 of the Golden Grove estate, better known as Salmon Grove. And then all of the owners of Salmon Grove houses pay $85 a month for lease, because it's leasehold land. It's leased for 985 years, so that they pay $85 a month. So Duff and Phelps, central bank being very cautious now, decided to value in everything. You may have heard some talk about sewer land. In Farrell's valuation, he values 382 acres. He did not value the sewer lands. And let me explain what the sewer lands are. There is a sewage treatment plant that serves the Baku area in Tobago. And after the water is treated in that sewage treatment plant, the gray water, the effluent, is discharged into a part of the swamp that forms part of the Golden Grove estate. So it's sewer lands. It can't be used for any other purpose. It has been there for many, many years since the housing estate, probably in Eric Williams' days, was constructed in the Baku area. So there's a sewage treatment plant associated with that housing estate and the rest of the village. And the sewage effluent, after it's treated, and it finally comes out as what is called gray water, goes into a particular part of the swamp in the Golden Grove estate, which can't be used for any other purpose, and has been used for this purpose as a discharge area for effluent for more than 50 years. But Duff and Phelps decided to value it. So Farrell didn't value it. He excluded it because he decided, well, what's the point? Duff and Phelps valued it. So Duff and Phelps valued 398 acres as opposed to the 382 acres valued by Farrell. Duff and Phelps did the valuation about 8 months later. It's a very current valuation, February 24th, 2017. And they valued the 398 acres, including the 16 acres of sewer land, at $174.8 million. Remember, Farrell had valued 382 acres, excluding the sewer land, for $170. Duff and Phelps went further and included the sewer land and ascribed a value on that of $4.8 million, which I actually think is quite generous because the lands can't be used for anything, and it's a reservoir for sewage. But Duff and Phelps put $4.8 million on that. They then valued the house at Lot 4, Salmon Grove, at $3.6 million, the house at Lot 26, Salmon Grove, at $3.5 million, and the cash flow from the peppercorn lease rental at a present value of $1.9 million, coming up with total valuation of the assets of these two companies, Occidental and Oceanic, of $183.8 million. And then Duff and Phelps indicated that there was some tax relief, deferred tax relief available to the company, valued at $5.5 million. So that took it up to $189.4. and then there were some liabilities of 3 million. They came up with a final value, including all of the land, the sewer land too, the 2 remaining houses in Golden Grove, and the residual peppercorn lease rental, a total value of $186.3 million. And that is the value at which it was transferred. So all of this talk about valuations, and I can tell you that when Duff and Phelps did their valuation, being internationally reputable valuers, having been used for years to value assets associated with CL Financial and Colonial Life and so on, they looked at resort properties, oceanfront properties in Mexico, in Jamaica, in Panama, and in many expensive resorts all over the Caribbean. And they used those valuations as a basis to value this land. So the figures in the Project Rebirth, which are not valuations, they're just numbers on a piece of paper, because they're not supported by any document, are absurd. So you have Farrell valuing the land at 170 in June, around June 2016, and you have Duff and Phelps coming and valuing the same land and adding on the sewer land at almost $175 million. And that is the process in the law. I've heard some talk about Salmon Grove. The government did not acquire Salmon Grove. They acquired the two remaining house sites in Salmon Grove. There are 123 of them. I haven't checked to see if it was 125 minus 2 or 123 minus 2. It doesn't matter. I've seen 123 sites. There were at least 121 which had been sold to private citizens who built their houses or kept it there for speculation. The government did not acquire Salmon Grove. So I have no understanding of how Salmon Grove, which is not part of this acquisition, arrived into this conversation as a red herring to distract from the fact that you have 2 professional valuers, one local, one foreign, who arrived at the same value, and then next door, Terra Caribbean has valued 147 acres at 75 million using similar indices, using similar comparators throughout the Caribbean, and resort properties of a similar ilk to the resort property that is intended for that area in Tobago. So all of this talk from these mouthpieces about undervaluation is just baseless. There's another point that I need to deal with. There's been a lot of talk about the audited accounts. And I must say I feel a little upset when I'm asked why didn't the government produce audited accounts for the last 8 years, when this government has only been in office for 22 months. I really don't appreciate that people will ask this government, why hasn't the government produced audited accounts for CL Financial for the last 8 years, and then throw the blame on this government. Let me tell you what we found, and the Prime Minister referred to it. When we put government directors into CL Financial towards the end of 2015, when the PNM came back into government, we found that there were no audited accounts. So for that entire period prior 2010 all the way up to 2015, there were no audited accounts. And I've seen another former minister in the newspapers today saying that they couldn't get them because the auditors couldn't find the documents. So for 5 years, that company operated without audited accounts and without any attempt on the part of those who came before us to get audited accounts. But what we did when we came in, we decided that this was an unacceptable situation, so that this administration, this PNM government, instructed its government directors on CL Financial to start preparing audited accounts. And I can tell you, it has been reported to me that draft audited accounts have been prepared and are now being finalized by the auditors up to the year 2015. And as soon as these audited accounts are available, they will be made public. So it is this government that went in and found this unacceptable state of affairs, where this huge conglomerate was operating for 5 years or more without audited accounts. And it is this administration that came in and decided that can't be acceptable. And we are the ones who laid the foundation for audited accounts for CL Financial to be finally prepared. And there's a twist on that. I saw that former minister talking about they couldn't get the documents. But the Minister of Finance, then, in 2015, under the former administration, was the subject of a court order where a freedom of information request had been made for the production of certain documents. And one of the set of documents that the court ordered the former administration to produce was the audited accounts. They didn't produce them. They appealed. They couldn't produce them because it didn't exist. So I came in as Minister of Finance, and I found myself subject to this court order. And I'm under threat of contempt of court to produce accounts for CL Financial that don't exist. And that will explain why this government had no choice. Reluctantly, we didn't want to do it. We had to continue with the appeal because I can't produce the accounts because they don't exist. And we are in the process of getting these accounts, and we will submit them to the person who asked for the Freedom of Information request and also to the court as soon as the audited financial statements are ready. I was also commanded as Minister of Finance to produce a record of a presentation made by former Minister Dukaran to independent senators in or around 2011 and 2012. That's in this court order as well. No record of any such presentation exists in the Ministry of Finance. So I could not comply. And there's another reason why we had to reluctantly continue with the appeal, because I certainly can't do that one. I can produce this government can produce the audited accounts, but we can't produce that presentation. Doesn't exist. It was Dukaran making a presentation to independent senators, and all copies of that presentation have mysteriously disappeared. The other thing that was the subject of that Freedom of Information order was to provide the names of all the persons who sold their policies to the government in 2011 and 2012, and the value of the policies. And we sought advice, and we were advised that's an invasion of privacy to give the name of every single person who sold their policy, their address, etc., and the amount of money they had in colonial life. So again, that is a matter for the Court of Appeal to deal with. But these are not things we wanted to do. I just wanted to clear it up, that in the case of the audited accounts, they don't exist, we couldn't produce them. In the case of the record of the presentation made by the former ministers to the independent senators, disappeared. And with respect to the names of everybody who had cashed in their policies and their address and the amount, that's a privacy issue that the Court of Appeal will decide, and of course we will abide by the decision of the court. I was going to deal with this last, but let me deal with it now. One of the persons who had attempted to get onto the board of CL Financial, there were two persons, Carlton Rees and Kirk Carpenter. Kirk Carpenter was the person that met with me on the 12th of August 2016, where we discussed the extension of the shareholders agreement along with other representatives of the shareholders. So Kirk Carpenter and Carlton Rees were the subject of a notice for a special general meeting of CL Financial, where they would be added to the board of CL Financial, thereby giving the shareholders 5 board members as opposed to the government's 4, and thereby giving the shareholders a majority on the board. Mr. Rees has been very visible in the electronic media together with one of the mouthpieces, who, by the way, has no shares in CL Financial and cashed in his policy in May 2012 with Colonial Life, and therefore also has no policies with Colonial Life. Let me repeat that. One of the mouthpieces that appears with Mr. Rees has no shares. You want to know who it is, Mr. Brown? Come on, I have to read and spell for you. Mr. Purmel. Mr. Purmel has no shares in CL Financial, and he cashed in his policies with CLICO in 2012, so he has no policies. So he's clearly speaking for somebody else because he has no interest. He has no locus, no nexus, no connection whatsoever. But be that as it may, Mr. Rees announced in the electronic media on more than one occasion that the shares of CL Financial as a company is worth $40 billion. I see Mr. Nanton nodding his head. You heard it too. Sorry, Mr. Kamal, I'm so sorry. Kamal, I apologize. I see Mr. George is nodding his head. So we heard this astonishing statement that CLF is worth $40 billion. This was part of Mr. Rees's campaign to give the impression that the government was doing something wrong because we were trying to steal a company worth $40 billion. I have caused a search to be made of the company's registry, and I have discovered that there is a company by the name of Dalco Capital Management Company Limited. This company was first incorporated in or around 1998 with Mr. Lawrence Dupre as the owner of the company. As you go through the company's records, you see various people coming on and off the board of this company, including Mr. Carlos John and so on. And then in 2016 or 2015, Mr. Carlton Rees makes an appearance as a director of Dalco Capital Management Company Limited. And in January 2016, Mr. Dupre, Lawrence Dupre, who had been the owner all along, transferred his shares in Dalco Capital Management Company Limited to Mr. Carlton Rees. All that is fine. There's one little problem, that the shares were transferred at a value of $99. $99. So, Dalco Capital Management Company is the owner of 26% of CL Financial. That's a fact, because we've also checked the shareholding of CL Financial. So Dalco Capital Management Company owns 26% of CL Financial, which according to Mr. Rees is worth $40 billion. So 26% of $40 billion is $10 billion. The stamp duty on a transfer of shares worth $10 billion is $50 million. The stamp duty on a transfer of shares worth $99 is 50 cents. So the Ministry of Finance will be investigating this matter to see why a company that is purportedly valued by one of its owners at $40 billion, why the shares in that company were transferred for $99 instead of at a rate of $10 billion, attracting stamp duty of $50 million. And this is taxpayers' money we're talking about. Because if you transfer shares in a company worth $10 billion, $50 million comes to the state, goes to the consolidated fund to pay the same schools and police station and so on. So we will be looking into this matter to see how is it possible for this multi-billion-dollar company to be valued at only $99. Let me go now to one of my final points. I will answer any questions that members of the media have. There's been a lot of talk in the press about CL World Brands and who owns CL World Brands and what is CL World Brands and what's its relationship to Angostura, and so on. Our research has led us through statements in Colonial Life's audited accounts. By the way, Colonial Life's audited accounts are now up to date to the end of December 2016. Our research has led us to discover that Angostura is owned, I'll round it off, 45% by a company called Rumpro, 32% by Colonial Life Insurance Company, now under the control of the central bank, and 22% by the public, more or less. Rumpro is owned 100% by a company called CL World Brands, incorporated in Scotland. And by a series of declarations of trust and transfers for money received, CL World Brands is owned 42% by Colonial Life, 38% by CL Financial, and 20% by Clico Investment Bank. Clico Investment Bank is in liquidation under the control of the Deposit Insurance Corporation. The government has put billions of dollars into Clico Investment Bank, and we're hoping to recover that. And Colonial Life, as I said, is under the control of the central bank. Between Colonial Life and Clico Investment Bank, they own 62% of CL World Brands. And when you add the 32% that is owned by Colonial Life directly in Angostura, and then take account of the 45% of Rumpro that's owned by CL World Brands, the net result of all of this is that CL Financial only owns 17% of Angostura. Let me do the maths for you again. Rumpro owns 45% of Angostura, CL World Brands owns 100% of Rumpro, and CL Financial owns 38% of CL World Brands. So 38% of 45% is 17%. So CL Financial owns just 17% of Angostura. But for some reason, and it only owns 38% of CL World Brands, but for some reason, all of the profits flowing from these companies have been finding their way into the bank account of CL Financial. And this too will be investigated as to how come you have all these declarations of trust that show that CL Financial only owns 17% of Angostura and 38% of CL World Brands, but all of the money is flowing from CL World Brands is coming back to CLF. Something's very wrong here, very wrong. And if you go and look in the audited accounts of Colonial Life, going back to 2015, you will see a note that it has ownership in CL World Brands. So somebody's up to something funny there. Somebody's trying to deny the fact that CL Financial only owns 17% of Angostura and 38% of CL World Brands, and therefore should only be entitled to dividends in proportion to its ownership. But the funny thing about this company, CL World Brands, it traded in alcohol and spirits companies. It purchased the Burn Stewart distillery in Scotland. It bought 60% of a vodka manufacturer from Poland called Belvedere. And then it engaged in a number of other acquisitions and sales. And all of the money it received from these sales went into CL World Brands and then flowed back into CLF and then was used by the shareholders for whatever purpose. The funny thing is, the money to purchase all these companies came from policyholders. Where do you think the money came from? The money had to come from somewhere. So the money came from policyholders. And this is why this company found itself in so much trouble, because having used policyholders' money to do these investments, and then the investments didn't work out, this is why the CL Group found itself in so much difficulty in the 2008-2009 period. So this too, this complicated network of companies between Rumpro, Angostura, and CL World Brands, and these declarations of trust will be investigated, and we will get to the bottom of this. The liquidators, that's one of their assignments.